The historical roots of both Russia and Ukraine trace back to the formation of Kievan Rus, a powerful medieval state that existed from the late 9th century to the mid-13th century. Kievan Rus, often seen as the birthplace of the East Slavic civilization, was a federation of Slavic tribes with Kiev, then known as Kiev, as its capital. It played a central role in shaping the identity, culture, and religion of the people who lived there, including the modern-day Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians. In 988, under Prince Vladimir the Great, Kievan Rus adopted Christianity from the Byzantine Empire, which cemented its place in the Christian Orthodox world. This religious conversion deeply influenced the culture of the region, uniting the people under Eastern Orthodoxy. However, over time, the political and cultural influence of Kiev waned, and Kievan Rus fragmented into smaller principalities. This early period is key to understanding the foundation of Ukraine-Russia relations because both modern nations trace their origins back to Kievan Rus. Russia often claims continuity with this medieval state, citing the establishment of the Russian Orthodox Church and the eventual rise of Moscow as its successor. Ukraine, on the other hand, sees itself as the true successor to Kievan Rus, particularly in regard to the legacy of Kiev. The Mongol invasion in the 13th century devastated Kievan Rus. Kiev fell to the Mongols in 1240, and much of the region was absorbed into the Mongol Empire. The western part of the former Kievan Rus territory, including parts of modern-day Ukraine, came under the influence of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and later Poland, while the northeastern territories eventually fell under the control of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, the forerunner of modern Russia. As Moscow grew in power and influence, it began to assert itself as the heir to Kievan Rus. By the 15th century, the Grand Duchy of Moscow had expanded its territory significantly, gradually consolidating its power over other Russian principalities. This marked the beginning of the rise of the Russian state, which increasingly looked to extend its influence over the lands of Ukraine. At this point, Ukraine's trajectory was diverging from that of Russia. Large parts of Ukraine came under Polish-Lithuanian control, and a distinct Ukrainian identity began to emerge, particularly among the Cossacks, a semi-independent, militarized society that played a critical role in Ukrainian history. In the 17th century, Ukraine found itself caught between competing powers: Poland, the Ottoman Empire, and Muscovy, the precursor to Russia. The Zaporozhian Cossacks, a group of fiercely independent warriors, became a prominent force in Ukraine, defending their lands and asserting a distinct identity. Led by Bohdan Khmelnytsky, the Cossacks launched a rebellion against Polish rule in 1648, sparking a wider conflict known as the Khmelnytsky Uprising. In 1654, Khmelnytsky signed the Treaty of Pereyaslav with Tsar Alexis of Russia, seeking military protection from Poland in exchange for recognizing Russian suzerainty. While the exact terms of this treaty are still debated by historians, it marked a significant turning point in Ukraine's history. For Russia, this treaty was seen as the beginning of its control over Ukraine. For many Ukrainians, however, it was a difficult decision that led to centuries of foreign domination. The Treaty of Pereyaslav laid the groundwork for Russia's increasing influence in Ukraine, although Ukrainian autonomy persisted for some time. This era marked the beginning of the complicated relationship between the two nations, where Ukrainian aspirations for self-rule and independence were repeatedly challenged by Russian imperial ambitions. Throughout the 18th century, Russia gradually tightened its grip on Ukraine. Under Catherine the Great, the autonomy of the Cossack Hetmanate was eliminated, and Ukraine was fully integrated into the Russian Empire. The western part of Ukraine, which had been under Polish-Lithuanian control, was later divided between Russia and the Austrian Empire after the partitions of Poland. This period saw significant efforts by the Russian Empire to suppress Ukrainian culture and language, as part of a broader policy of Russification. Russian authorities viewed Ukrainian identity as a threat to the unity of the empire and sought to minimize regional distinctiveness. This included banning the Ukrainian language in schools and publications and promoting the narrative that Ukrainians were simply Little Russians, a subset of the Greater Russian people. Despite these efforts, a Ukrainian national consciousness continued to develop, particularly among the intelligentsia and cultural leaders. The 19th century saw the emergence of Ukrainian literature and political thought, with figures like Taras Shevchenko playing a key role in fostering Ukrainian national identity. The collapse of the Russian Empire in 1917 following the Russian Revolution created a window of opportunity for Ukraine. In the chaotic aftermath of the revolution, Ukraine declared its independence in 1918, establishing the Ukrainian People's Republic. However, this independence was short-lived. The Russian Civil War soon engulfed the region, and by 1922, Ukraine was incorporated into the Soviet Union as the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The Soviet period was marked by significant hardship for Ukraine. Under Joseph Stalin's rule, the collectivization of agriculture led to the Holodomor, a man-made famine in 1932–1933 that killed millions of Ukrainians. This tragedy is seen by many Ukrainians as a deliberate act of genocide, aimed at breaking the spirit of Ukrainian nationalism. During World War II, Ukraine was a major battleground, suffering immense destruction and loss of life. After the war, Ukraine remained a Soviet republic, but the spirit of independence persisted. Throughout the Soviet era, Ukrainian dissidents pushed for greater autonomy and resisted Soviet efforts to erase their national identity. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 was a turning point for Ukraine. On August 24, 1991, Ukraine declared its independence, which was confirmed by a nationwide referendum in December of that year, where over 90% of voters supported independence. The end of the Soviet Union allowed Ukraine to establish itself as a sovereign nation, but the road ahead was fraught with challenges. The 1990s were a time of political and economic instability in Ukraine, and the country faced the difficult task of navigating its relationship with Russia. While Ukraine sought to assert its independence, Russia continued to view Ukraine as part of its sphere of influence. In the years following independence, tensions between Ukraine and Russia continued to simmer, particularly over Ukraine's orientation toward the West. In 2004, the Orange Revolution erupted in response to widespread electoral fraud in Ukraine's presidential election, where the pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych was declared the winner. The peaceful protests led to a new election, which was won by the pro-Western candidate, Viktor Yushchenko. The Orange Revolution marked a turning point in Ukraine's relationship with Russia, as it signaled Ukraine's growing desire to align itself with Europe and distance itself from Russian influence. However, the relationship remained tense, especially when Yanukovych returned to power in 2010. In 2013, mass protests erupted again in Ukraine, this time over Yanukovych's decision to reject an association agreement with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia. These protests, known as Euromaidan, eventually led to Yanukovych's ousting in 2014 and set the stage for further conflict. In the aftermath of the Euromaidan protests and the ousting of Yanukovych, Russia swiftly annexed Crimea in 2014, a move widely condemned by the international community. This was followed by the outbreak of war in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists declared independence from Ukraine. The conflict has since evolved into a protracted war, with Russia providing military and logistical support to the separatists. The annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbas marked a significant escalation in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, bringing relations to their lowest point in modern history. For Ukraine, these events were seen as a direct assault on its sovereignty and territorial integrity. For Russia, they were framed as a defense of Russian-speaking populations and a response to perceived Western encroachment in its sphere of influence. The historical background of Russia-Ukraine relations is deeply rooted in a shared heritage, but it has been shaped by centuries of conflict, imperialism, and divergent national identities. From the medieval era of Kievan Rus to the present-day conflict over Crimea and eastern Ukraine, the relationship between the two nations has been marked by a constant struggle for power, identity, and sovereignty. Today, as Ukraine continues to assert its independence and align itself with the West, the historical tensions between the two nations remain as relevant as ever. Understanding this complex history is crucial to making sense of the current geopolitical landscape and the future of Ukraine-Russia relations.